Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 28th of June 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to have Dr. Graham Downing joining us, and we'll be talking a little bit later about HPV vaccines and some of the reported dangers. But before we get there, just a little focus on our illustrious Prime Minister, Theresa May.
Is this what you call sex appeal, Brian?
I'm not going to comment
if anybody wants
to
know about that, you need to watch the beginning of yesterday's programme and see the Spectator article. But anyway.
Here she is. And I couldn't resist this. A number of people picked up on this really amazing photograph of one of the most uncomfortable curtsies the nation has ever seen. So Theresa May, we don't think, could get any lower at all in her grovelling to the royal family. But as somebody pointed out, the situation got worse, and they produced a little poem, which I will do my best. There was an old lady called May who crumpled her curtsy this way. Because her tight skirt got stuck in it hurt, and she could not arise, so they say. So there we are, Theresa May just not doing very well in the royal family scene. She grovelled, got stuck, that tight skirt didn't work, so presumably her sex appeal has also dropped.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, let's move on. Press and media. Now, back in 2012, the UK column published a number of articles on what we saw as a major threat to press freedom in the UK. Of course, that was a Leveson inquiry. Leveson inquiry set up with common purpose backers to curtail investigative reporting by British press under the veneer of dealing with what I think we all agree was pretty bad behaviour by some members of the press. Now, our 2012 articles were taken up by the mainstream media, particularly the Daily Mail, who in November 2013 published their expose of common purpose influence of the inquiry, and that effectively pulled the inquiry's teeth, in fact. But we have to say that the world of press and media has changed pretty massively since then. We've seen the purge of many of the most experienced journalists, and we've seen the decimation of mainstream media circulations, and well, a large proportion of it is the commercial pressures. And as a result, we've seen many newspapers hiding behind paywalls in an effort to maintain revenues. But worse than that, we've seen journalists becoming ever younger, less experienced, and with quotas that they have to maintain. So some journalists I know are having to produce 10 articles a day. And under those circumstances, how can anybody produce anything but an echo of the mainstream narrative, of the establishment narrative? So things have changed since that time in 2012, 2013. And in January this year, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport commissioned Mediatic to research what they described as the changing state of press market, to examine new business models being deployed by news publishers, and to provide information about media provision, distribution and consumption. And then in March, we reported on a statement to the House of Commons by Matt Hancock, the Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, on the state of the so-called free press in the UK, and he announced that there would be no second part of the Leveson inquiry, and he suggested that there would need to be some government intervention to support press and media from a business point of view, and that was followed up a couple of weeks later by him speaking at the Oxford Media Convention 2018, and echoing, well, let's have a look, just remind ourselves what he said, because he said the first area that he wanted to look at was accuracy, where we're seeing real threats, he said, to our media, to our society as a whole, disinformation, also known as fake news. Now, let's not pretend that journalism has always been an error-free business, he said. News is fast-paced, but there's a difference between a mistake under pressure of a deadline and deliberate disinformation designed to disrupt. He said, we know that some of the problem is state-sponsored Russia, for instance, persistently deploying its state-run media organizations to manipulate democratic institutions. He went on to say that he complained bitterly about the situation with regards to regulation. He said that, obviously, broadcast media are regulated by Ofcom. He said that newspapers regulated by IPSO. But he said that individuals publishing online are untouched by media regulation. This was a major concern for him. And he said he's passionate in his belief in a free and open internet, but freedom does not mean freedom to harm others. freedom can only exist within a framework. It's not freedom then. And he said that digital platforms need to step up and play their part in establishing online rules and working for the benefit of the public that uses them. And he went on to say that he trembled at the thought of a media regulated by the state in a time of malevolent forces in politics get this wrong, and he feared for the future of our liberal democracy. And so he announced the Cairncross Review. This is a review being led by Dame Frances Cairncross. And he said it was going to explore whether intervention, that's state intervention, government intervention, may be required to safeguard the future of our free and independent press. But Brian, if the government intervenes, it's no longer independent, unless we use the definition of independence that we've been highlighting quite a lot over the last several months. But anyway, Dame Frances Cairncross is going to bring apparently her experience as a journalist in business and in academia to bear on the thorny, complex questions at the heart of press sustainability. And there are going to be panelists on here like Peter Wright, former editor of the Mail on Sunday, Polly Curtis, editor-in-chief of the Huffington Post, Geraldine Allinson, the chair of the KM Media Group. Well, at the time, Matt Hancock said that the Cairncross Review will take a clear-eyed view of how the press is faring in this world, in this new world, explore where innovation is working well, and explore whether intervention may be required. Well, you'll be glad to know that the Cairncross Review has now opened its doors. It is now asking for people to comment, so this call for evidence is going to close on Friday the 7th of September this year, and they're inviting any interested organisation or individual to submit written evidence to inform the final report, which is due to be published early next year. And they're talking about 25% drop in journalists, 50% drop in revenues in the industry, and so on. So they're very concerned about this. The review panel, they say, made up of experts from the field of journalism, academia, advertising and technology, is seeking a greater understanding of the apparent decline by gathering evidence and views from both consumers and across the UK's diverse media industry. So this is what the lady herself had to say. The review is not about preserving the status quo. We need to explore ways in which we can ensure that consumers in 10 years' time have access to high-quality journalism which meets their needs, is delivered in the way they want, and supports democratic engagement. This call for evidence enables all those with an interest to contribute their knowledge and views so we can build the evidence and make impactful recommendations going forward. Well, I suppose this is the opportunity for everybody to make their feelings known.
Absolutely, Mike, and people, in my opinion, should do. They need to, because you can see what's happening here. So the close down on all these local titles has largely been helped, of course, by massive deals by Trinity, Mirror and the rest, hoovering up small local papers. We can now see that even the larger division of local newspapers, that is being, that's being farmed out now, so that we've just got local live titles on the website. That's happening in Plymouth with Plymouth Newsprint, the Plymouth Herald. It's happening in other areas as well. So a created problem, and then the BBC's now embedding itself, training local journalists, and the government says, well, really, you need us to regulate it. So this is going to total state control of the media in a communitarian system, Mike, I think, by the language
absolutely.
this lady's used.
Absolutely, and I think one of the most concerning developments is that, of course, I mentioned that so many journalists have lost their jobs over the last 4 or 5 years. Those journalists are moving into commercial isn't the right word, they're moving into almost agencies where agents are taking corporate messages, presenting them as if they're journalism, and effectively pushing them into the mainstream press as if they're journalism. And it's becoming very, very difficult now to discover whether, or to make a judgment on whether an article which is appearing in the mainstream press has actually been written by a Telegraph or a Times or a Guardian journalist, or whether it's been pushed in there by some other third-party organisation that doesn't seem to come under any of the regulation that Matt Hancock has been talking about, actually.
And may have an agenda itself.
Absolutely.
This is the key thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, brief reminder, Alternative View 9 DVDs available on the UK Column website. Graham Downing, who'll be joining us shortly, was speaking at that event, and his DVD, of course, is in there. You were speaking as well, Brian. Excellent group of presentations, and well, it's only available at this price for another 2 or 3 days, so get yours while you can.
And we'll also say amongst that, Alex Thompson gave a really outstanding talk, which many people picked up on the weekend. So a lot of good talks, but there's a particularly good one, in my opinion, of Alex Thompson. Right, well, I just had to bring this up. We've mentioned the BBC already, but an interview by Emily Maitlis, presenter for Newsnight. And this lady interviewed the Hungarian foreign minister. It was incredible in its venom and the viciousness which this man was attacked. Instead of being treated as a guest, the BBC didn't want to hear what he had to say. This lady almost spitting at him. If this is one image that I captured from this interview, encourage people to watch it because it is so disgraceful. But she was almost spitting in her hatred because this man was daring to say that Hungary believed it should be able to make its own national decisions. And at the moment, they believe that should include very strict controls on their borders. You've got to watch her to see the response. And of course, this is the agenda, not just of this woman, Emily Maitlis, but this is the BBC agenda. And the gentleman at one stage, he handled it very well, sort of said, well, you're attacking me. This is xenophobia. And absolutely right.
Where's Ofcom in that, I wonder?
Well, Ofcom won't get involved because it's the BBC. And of course, the BBC is the flag of independent, upright journalism.
Well, sticking with immigration, the UNHCR is concerned apparently with the ongoing human tragedy in which almost 1,000 refugees and migrants have perished while being smuggled across the Mediterranean this year. And so the UNHCR and the UN Migration Agency, the IOM, are today appealing to the European Union for concerted region-wide action to greatly reduce needless loss of life at sea. So they believe a new collaborative approach is needed to make disembarkation of people rescued at sea more predictable and manageable. And this should build on ongoing collaboration between the EU, UN and African Union. Well, that's quite timely because today is the European Council meeting. Well, it's going to focus on migration and on security and defence, as well as economic and financial affairs. So Theresa May will be there today. This is going to be an EU 28 meeting today. Tomorrow is an EU 27 meeting where they will discuss Brexit. So Britain will not be involved in that, and also the Eurozone. So I find it interesting, Brian, that today Theresa May will be there to discuss security and defence, but not Brexit. So I've got to say that if Britain is not to be a full member of whatever EU military unification produces at the end of the day, then why would they be covering that subject as an EU 28 and not an EU 27? They could have pushed that back until tomorrow if Britain was not to be involved in that. But clearly we are going to be involved in that, which is why she's involved. Anyway, migration, the heads of state or government, they say, are expected to highlight the achievements since the height of the crisis in 2015. And illegal migration has since been reduced, they say, by over 95%. And they are going to come up with all kinds of plans, including special disembarkation platforms, close cooperation with relevant third countries, and so on, pretty much just as the UNHCR has requested. I often wonder whether this is about preventing loss of life in the Mediterranean, or whether these types of what they're building is an infrastructure for people trafficking. They're bringing people into the country, onto the continent, in an organised manner, aside from whatever's happening illegally.
Well, the migration created, and on the back of the created migration, you bring in the real control system that you want, but you can't describe it as a control system. It has to have some humanitarian description. It's deceit, lies and deceit.
But interesting development in France because Macron, well, all the mainstream media with headlines like this is Euronews saying, on Macron's orders, France will bring back compulsory national service. And, well, what exactly is it? The text here says the French government has introduced a plan to bring back compulsory national service for 16-year-olds. And you initially think military service here, but it's not just that. Apparently, Macron had said he would reinstate military service during his election campaign, but he seems to have watered that down somewhat because basically what's going to happen is that 16-year-olds will do a minimum 1 month placement with a focus on civic culture. So this is big society going on in France.
Yeah.
It will involve teaching, working with charities, traditional military training with the police, fire service or the army. And they can volunteer to do a further 3 months to a year after that, which would involve an area linked to defence and security, or else they can do more volunteer work. So the government spokesman said there are different conditions that we'll put in place. People who can do longer periods according to their desires, whether in the associative field, in the military, in the civic field, or in the health sector. But clearly a big focus of this is less about the military, although that's available to people, but much more about civic engagement, so-called citizenship, and involvement with NGOs and this idea of big society moving across into France.
Yeah, and in your face, and of course none of big society in this country has gone away. The press and the media don't talk about it anymore, but the whole thing is being stitched together very quickly. Cameron and Clegg both involved with charities in the back door, bringing this thing together.
Okay, as we suggested would happen, the OPCW has adopted Boris's proposal. So yesterday, the fourth special session of the conference on the states parties to the Chemical Weapons Convention adopted the decision on addressing the threat from chemical weapons use. It was adopted 106 voting, 82 states voted yes, 24 states voted no. And they said that in the strongest possible terms, the use of chemical weapons by anyone under any circumstances, emphasizing that any use of chemical weapons anywhere at any time by anyone under any circumstances is unacceptable and contravenes international norms and standards. But they, of course, this includes this business of attribution to identify the perpetrators of the use of chemical weapons in the Syrian Arab Republic, and also to affirm that whenever chemical weapons use occurs on the territory of a state party, those who were perpetrators, organisers, sponsors, or otherwise involved should be identified. So it's pretty clear what's going to happen here. The report on the alleged Duma chemical weapons attack, which is a complete fraud set up by these people on the screen at the moment, the white helmets, is going to come out imminently, and they're going to blame the Syrian government for it, and they're also going to call out the organisers, sponsors, or those otherwise involved, which will be Russia. So we can pretty clear what's going on there. And of course, lots of rumours of the white helmets getting organised for a further event. But I just wanted to highlight this image that's on screen at the moment, because if we look at this image, Brian, this was from a previous white helmets propaganda video where sarin was allegedly used, and you can see the huge hose pipe that the guy's holding in the background, hosing these children down. And of course, we can see that they're wearing gas masks. So they're well protected in the Novichok sense, because as we can see here, we've got no gloves on.
Yeah.
So this guy must have died immediately.
Well, probably not. He had a handy supply of baby wipes,
Yes,
as recommended by Public Health England for dealing with Novichok incidents, Mike. So that's probably what he did.
Well, I mean, white helmets, absolutely magical in their abilities, and clearly chemical weapons, no problem for them.
Yeah. Do we believe the official story? No, we don't. Well, let's move on to the subject of vaccines. And yesterday we'd contacted a charity, which is Joe's Cervical Cancer Trust, because they were heavily promoting HPV vaccines, and we challenged them as to where their evidence was. Now I'm going to say that they were kind enough to come back with quite a long email providing links through to what they said was evidence supporting the efficacy and the safety of HPV vaccines. I'll just read a little bit of this. It says, "Hi Brian, thanks for getting in touch. We spoke with your colleague sorry, you spoke with my colleague Kate about the HPV vaccine and what evidence we have to say it's best given before puberty. Actually, I didn't ask that. I talked about whether it was safe or not. We use the word puberty for two reasons. The first is HPV vaccine works best if it's given to people before they're sexually active, which is another way of saying before they come into contact with human papillomavirus. Sorry, got there. We say puberty because this is a time when young people may start to become sexually active. The second is because people usually have a better immune response when they're younger. And so it goes on, and then it lists some documents. Now, people can freeze this screen, and I'm going to encourage you, our viewers, to check out these references for themselves to see what they think about them. I did go and have a look at the link through to the NHS, and in fact that is a circular link because it simply takes you through to information produced by the drug manufacturer of Gardasil itself. But nevertheless, the point was that in the newspaper articles, children from the age of 9 on were the target for being given vaccines, and that's why we challenged them. Now, at the bottom of this email, you can't see is this. Sorry, you can't see it on the original, but this is the link. Our B Cervix Savvy Roadshow is in Scotland, bringing information about cervical cancer prevention. Find out where we'll be visiting, and that takes you through to this link. So this charity, highly active in promoting vaccines, amongst other recommendations, but I'm going to say they were kind enough to actually respond, which of course many of these charities don't. Now, against their statement that the vaccines are safe, some of the information that I looked at over the last few days included this sort of thing. This is LifeSite, Gardasil linked to deaths and disabilities after young girls vaccinated, and this is an investigation by the Toronto Star. Quite a lot of information in the article, can't go through it all, but it says, since its introduction in 2007 in the US and Canada, the Gardasil vaccine against HPV, the main cause of cervical cancer and genital warts, has been injected in more than 50 million people in more than 130 countries, mostly women, but concern over serious side effects and deaths. And so they go on, and they're talking about 100 deaths and tens of thousands of reports of adverse effects, contrasting it with the fact that the Canadian government spent 300 million Canadian dollars in promoting it. And it goes on, and I'm going to leave people to read this themselves, but it says the Star found plenty of parents who believe the vaccine caused their daughters' illnesses, and on the contrary, a consensus of public health and medical professionals who dismiss all these claims. And this is the meat of the subject. People are saying it's making their children ill, but professionals dismissing that. They've got a quote from Norma Erickson, the president of SaneVax, who says, I know some survivors of those first 12,000 reports, and none of them has ever spoken to any investigators. And this is a key point because they're saying not investigated. And this lady goes on to say that there's 2 Gardasil ingredients which are believed to be the most dangerous, aluminium as a neurotoxin, and L-histidine, if I pronounce that correctly, and an amino acid that interferes with the brain's defences against metal toxins. So before we introduce Dr. Graham Downing, who's kindly agreed to come and speak on today's news, we're just going to show you a little film clip of Dr. Downing being interviewed by Ian Crane, talking about the promotion of sexual activities amongst young children. Now, this is pretty graphic, but the reason we want to show you this is because, of course, in the newspaper articles, including the Telegraph, talking about HPV vaccines, it's stressed that one of the reasons they want boys to be vaccinated is because they may later have sex with men.
I know you have some interesting observations about the author of this particular article, and I've just pulled this up on screen here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't wish this woman any ill will, and I'm sure she thought she was writing a great article. And it just, she's, I mean, you can probably read it better than me. She declares that she's a sex educator and a feminist, and on her site, she talks about pussy power and selling all sorts of products to do with sex, which is fine. I wouldn't, I'm not suggesting she's pitching those at teenagers, but you kind of get the vibe of what this girl's about, and that's her thing. That's fine. And then underneath, you see there has been a lot of outrage. In fact, I've shown this article to many, many, many people and professionals, and everyone has been quite shocked by it, quite frankly. I don't know anyone who said, oh, well, that's a great idea. And some mums, I think it's called Mummy Activist there, I think she's been outraged by it. She started a campaign to try and get it pulled. And people that then, allegedly in this article, they criticised the article, and apparently the response from Team Vogue was to call them homophobic, which, and everyone I showed this article, none of those were homophobic. They couldn't give a damn what your interests were. It was just the fact that young minds would receive this article would receive it first and foremost, and then in an unbalanced version of it as well. And I think that was probably the reason why most people were shocked, certainly the reason why I was shocked by it.
Okay, well, there we are. Now let's bring in Dr. Graham Downing. Graham, thank you very much for joining us. I was quite shocked with that clip, which I hadn't actually seen before, even though that was an interview with Ian Crane. But I was reading a lot of material yesterday, which was clearly promoting ever more sexual activity amongst ever younger children, which you're highlighting in that clip. Now, I've also got this image which you provided, where we've got Teen Vogue also promoting HPV. So I wonder whether we could start somewhere here, take us into this, and then I know that you're going to lead us through information including the serious effects of vaccines and infant mortality.
Sure. Great to be here again. So this was a Humanity versus Insanity interview, as you know, and the Teen Vogue did an article, wrote an article, and it effectively was saying basically how to have anal sex, and that's what we were responding to. And there was a big outcry about it, quite rightly, I think. Now, the thing you have to remember is I'm not judging what an adult does, okay? The problem was this magazine is read by 8 years old up to the early 20s, okay? And with the greatest respect to the person that wrote it and the publishers, I don't think it's appropriate to be talking to an 8-year-old explaining how to have anal sex. I mean, and the fact they even have to say that is astonishing. It should just be a given. The article had no balance as far as I was concerned and other people. It didn't really talk about the risk and the risk of disease. To some extent, I think they modified it after the outcry. And, it didn't really give a balanced view. And that was the problem, because there's huge issues with that practice. And the reality is the more partners you have, and if you engage in that practice, then the increasing risk for HPV infection. So so that was point one. And then this particular slide you've got up, you had up a second ago, is by a site which is called Levi Quackenboss, which is a funny name. But it's a pretty good site. And he went through it, and he actually pointed out the fact that this magazine has pretty much been promoting this vaccine for some time, for quite a few years. And he lists all the articles there, and you can read them. And he suggested that, the reality is, he said, do you honestly think that they're going to write all these articles for free? And then underneath that, there's a quote you can see in black, though, white on black. And he says that the kind of parent been asked, and they've just launched a new pharma-focused division, I'm reading it, to amp up its reader targeting powers and drive more custom branding content for its pharma clients. So he was suggesting that, that these are effectively I suppose, advertorials. They're not really independent pieces. And then the link that people made was, well, hold on a second, you're promoting sexual activities amongst young people, which will increase the risk of HPV. And then on the other side, you apparently are providing the quote unquote solution in these kind of articles, which very blatantly are just sales pieces for these vaccines.
Right, and you lead us on here. This next slide is talking about health, long-term use of the pill, and increasing cancer and decreasing cancer.
Yeah, what this is. It's okay. No, the thing with this is that if you're going to say to someone, have this vaccine, What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to say, right, I'm going to give you both sides of the coin. And I'm not suggesting anyone does or does not take this vaccine. That's up to you. I'm just going to give you the other side of the coin here. Because what causes an increase in, first off, they don't definitively know that this virus causes cancer. Okay, there's an association. That's point one. Now, point two, what if you assume that this virus does cause cancer? What are the mechanisms? One of the mechanisms they think is that because every woman will get this virus at some point. Okay, it's pretty much 100%. So, well, why is it that some get cancer? The reason is because the body has to clear the virus, and overwhelmingly, in the vast majority of people, it clears the virus. Okay. Well, anything that delays that is therefore going to be problematic, and what delays it is going on the pill, the contraception pill. What it does is you can boost your risk up to 4 times. There's a 4 times association of cancer if you're on the contraceptive pill. So, once again, you're giving the contraceptive pill allegedly gives more sexual freedom, and there's benefits to that as well as negatives. But in this case, by promoting that and then going on the pill, what you're then doing is you're putting women at risk for cervical cancer if you believe that the virus causes the cancer, which the whole of the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry does. So that's point one. Then what decreases cancer? Things like condom use. I mean, things like being monogamous, not being promiscuous. In other words, what you would normally suggest is the traditional way of behaving, which is being completely obliterated. In that Teen Vogue article, the woman effectively was saying, well, just do what you want. Okay. And once again, remind ourselves, a readership is from 8 years up into early 20s. And then I looked at the data, and there's loads of other reasons why so-called HPV rates may have fallen at the same time as they were measuring to see if their vaccine worked. And one of them is they were just screening less. Okay. And so when you put all these things together, you start to see that the picture they're painting isn't really a truthful picture. It's certainly not a balanced picture.
Okay, and we'll come back now to the subject of the dangers of the vaccine, or reported dangers of the vaccine. This is my key criticism, that where we see organisations such as Joe's Cervical Cancer Charity, I'm going to say I accept at the moment their heart's in the right place. They think they're doing good, but they're simply pushing out material which they've got from other sources and they believe it. What are some of the risks that you've seen, or at least seen other reports of?
Okay, so there's, I could literally talk, do an hour 15 on this alone. Okay, right. And there's a study there to the left. You can see it on your screen. And first off, there's over 100 plus, maybe 200 different strains of this virus. And they've initially only had a couple of the strains in the vaccine. Then they went up to 4 strains, and now they're on 9 strains. Now the problem is when you vaccinate, you go into a population of viruses, and you just selectively vaccinate against some. The ones that aren't necessarily a problem, they then rise up. It's a bit like they took out Saddam Hussein, and then the next lot come up who are going to give you a problem. And so you start to make relatively benign versions of this virus suddenly become far more dangerous. So, and that study shows it quite clearly. When they looked at those vaccinated against those unvaccinated, both high-risk strains and low-risk strains had increased in those vaccinated. Now, depending on how you dice the data, you can make it look good or bad, but they don't tell you that. They just give you the kind of, rose-tinted version of it. So that's point one. And then when you look at some critical reviews of this, and they've done very rarely because they're usually suppressed, authors are dissuaded from doing these things, sometimes very seriously dissuaded. There's an article there which is titled Serious Adverse Events After HPV Vaccination, a critical review of randomized trials and post-marketing case series. In other words, once they've given the vaccine, they then look into the data and see how it's affected people. And the thing you must know, and surely most people must know now, is most so-called randomized trials, they don't use an inert placebo. In other words, a safe something that they inject something into they inject the vaccine into one group and then inject relatively nothing into the other group. Okay, they don't do that. They use aluminium. Okay, so they're comparing the negative effects of the tested vaccine against injecting someone with aluminium. I mean, that's just ridiculous in the extreme. And also, it says here, Two of the largest randomized trials found significantly more severe adverse events in the tested vaccine in the arm of the study compared to the not. And bearing in mind they compare it to aluminium anyway. I mean, if they were to compare it to an inert substance, the difference would be even greater. And it also says here that when they compared it to the aluminium one, in the HPV tested, the vaccine group, there were more deaths. Okay, no one told you about that. And then if you look to the left, it says roughly, depending how you dice the figures, you can say there's roughly 13 or maybe 14 or 12 and a half serious events in those vaccinated compared to maybe one girl benefiting. Okay, so there's a 13-to-1 ratio here. So as you roll this vaccine out, for every one girl that might benefit allegedly from this vaccine, there's 13 serious events. And they list these events as death, life-threatening, requires hospitalization or prolongation of existing hospitalization, results in persistent or significant disability or incapacity, and congenital anomaly or birth defect. Now, the question is, when the physician speaks to the patient and says, right, we want to give your child the HPV vaccine, and there's a huge amount of pressure by nurses and teachers, maybe not so teachers, certainly nurses, are they telling the kids this? Are they telling the parents this? And just to reiterate, that ratio, about 13-to-1, wasn't, we're going to test the vaccine against an inert substance. That was actually testing the new vaccine against the old vaccine, which makes it even far worse. And bearing in mind that these studies are few and far between because a huge amount of pressure is put on people not to publish these studies. And recently there were two brilliant scientists, Italian scientists, who published some negative material about vaccines looking at contamination. They were threatened. They didn't kowtow. Then their house was raided. Their equipment was taken. I think they may have lost their positions. And I think they were arrested. And all they were doing was publishing science. And they dared to speak out against the vaccine. Once again, I'm not saying don't get vaccinated. I'm just saying you need to understand both sides of the argument.
Yeah, Graham, we've got so much here to deal with, and I know you are speaking on this quite regularly, but we will certainly do more. We'll try and go through the individual subject areas that we've got in the tight time remaining in our news today. I just wanted to point out that, of course, if we're giving these vaccines to 9-year-old, did they actually test? Did they conduct trials on children? Because I understand that the drug industry doesn't carry out drug test trials on children, so we would have a difference in the data results there. But you're going to lead us on now to the fact that, as well as adverse effects, we've actually got dropping fertility in women, or at least a lack of children.
Absolutely. So, and there's a study quickly to the left there. I know we're pressed for time. Just came out. And they said from this study, if 100% of females in the study had received the HPV vaccine, the data suggests, the numbers, that the number of women having ever conceived would have fallen by 2 million. So the concerns about infertility and problems with having babies appears to be borne out in this study. And then another shocker underneath, just published, and then was officially retracted because the author had to hide his name in fear of backlash, although they checked him out, said, no, this guy's right. His statistics are okay, but officially we have to retract it because he pretended to be a different person for his own protection. And he asked the question, actually, could this vaccination be causing an increase in cervical cancer? And he found out that he just crunched some basic numbers, the increased incidence amongst young females and the possibility of virus reactivation after vaccination, or the increase in pre-malignant changes, which was actually shown in original studies by the FDA and others, and the time relationship between the start of the vaccination and the increase in cervical cancer in Sweden could support this case. So he's actually saying there's opposite data showing that there might be an increase in cancer. But once again, no one's telling anyone about it. And in the original trials they showed that if you already are infected with the HPV vaccine, and bear in mind, you can be born infected with this, all right? And a high percentage of people, and especially young people, can already be infected with it, and you give the vaccine, your chances of getting the cancer increase. And once again, are they testing people to see if they're already infected? So, there's a huge amount of stuff they're not telling people.
Graham, you've got another one here, and I think this really starts to push it home. So we've got the BMJ And the question is, or the subject is, doctors cannot choose the best treatments for their patients despite the existence of hundreds of thousands of randomised
We've
trials.
lost Graham.
Pardon?
We've lost him. I regret
We've
to
lost.
say.
That's a real shame. Okay, well, let's just pop that slide back on screen, Mike, because I think this is one of the key ones, and I can show a couple of the other ones. But the information in many cases is out there, but we're prevented from seeing it. And what's worse, medical professionals are prevented from seeing it. So Dr. Downing here pointing out that doctors cannot choose the best treatment for their patients despite the existence of hundreds of thousands of randomised trials. The main reason is that research results are being reported selectively. And of course, who's got the money to help that selective process? Well, it's going to be big pharma that can really bring the pressure to bear. And we also had this one in relation to the BMJ, and this is pointing out now that we've got mortality increasing in England and Wales. This says for the first 7 weeks of 2018. And I would need Graham Downing to actually take you into some of the detail, but I can say that information we're receiving is beginning to show that deaths are, a rise in deaths is being observed in a number of different areas, including at times of the financial year change in the NHS, so in April time, which nobody wants to explain. Dr. Mark Jones has also been investigating this. And of course, it's been Sir Brian Jarman who's appeared on national news recently warning about these unexplained deaths. And he also was warning about activities of our political charity Common Purpose in relation to this. So we're saying trials out there, warning of dangers to do with vaccines, but doctors are not allowed to see them, the public's not allowed to see them. Massaging of figures where there are deaths. This is quite a serious situation, Mike.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we're sorry we lost Dr. Graham Downing there. We will get him back to finish that interview. In the meantime, we'll switch across, if we can, to Melanie Shaw, because I just wanted to give an update because we've got quite a lot of interest, quite rightly, in Melanie's case at the moment. So we'll just pop Melanie back on screen. Melanie Shaw, if you don't know, was the original whistleblower of the abuse of children at Beechwood Children's Home, Nottingham. Within a few months of her blowing the whistle, she ends up being pressured, harassed, bullied by the police, local council and other groups. She's eventually put into prison on a fraud charge. She comes out of prison. She's then put back into prison, supposedly for harassing a prison warder. And the latest was that she was due for release on the 2nd of June this month, but had not appeared. And we started to warn that days were passing and we had no idea why Melanie had not come out of prison. Now, we did make reports to say we had learnt that she was on remand for at least one crime committed in prison. But I said on one occasion that I did know what the charge was, and that is correct in that I know the area. However, for reasons that there is a case coming up, we do not feel it's appropriate for us to say what that charge is, although I can say it is serious. But it's also true to say I don't know the detail of the incident itself. So I am being guarded here because at the moment we know that Melanie is held on remand and is waiting another trial. But at the moment, is this information that should go out to the public? We don't think so. But what I wanted to get to is that we've had a little bit of furore on one of the Facebook groups where a particular individual has got very, very shirty because he says that Brian Gerrish is giving two messages, that he knows what the charge is, but he's not telling us, and also that it's obvious what's happening to Melanie because she's on remand. So I just wanted to answer some of this because it's been put across in a very aggressive way. Initially, we did not know what was happening with Melanie. We only knew that she hadn't been released. We then discovered she was on remand. And as this person says, presumably that means there was some form of court hearing. Well, there may have been, or possibly there was not, because we have no information on another court hearing for Melanie to make that judgment to put her on remand. Did she attend court? Possibly not, because very often she's been brought into court via video link. But we have no evidence to say there was a proper court case. However, we do know that at the moment she's on remand and waiting a trial. Now, somebody has suggested that there is a trial date of the 2nd of July. We said yesterday we have no information on such a date. Can anybody give us the evidence for that claim? No evidence has been brought forward. So we are going to defend our position. We do know some information about the crime which Melanie Shaw is alleged to have committed. If she has committed that crime, it is a serious crime with very serious implications. But I am not prepared to give more detail on that at the moment for the benefit of Melanie Shaw. And I'll also say that our reports with regard to a future hearing for Melanie are absolutely correct. Somebody has suggested a date of the 2nd of July, but at the moment we have seen no proof of that. And I'll just add that these sorts of very aggressive posts on Facebook or even Twitter messages that are put out, of course, destabilise all of the wonderful support that's been brought up for Melanie, and ultimately they're counterproductive. So I'm going to say I don't know whether this individual is misguided, but I want to make perfectly clear that at the moment UK Column does not hold evidence of the date of Melanie's trial for the crime which she's alleged to have committed in Style Prison. We'll leave it there. The good news is that we have received deliveries of postcards for Melanie Shaw. We'll bring those up as an advert in tomorrow's news. But we've already had a lot of orders, which shows us that a lot of people are keen to do what they can to help get this lady out of the clutches of the British state, a British state which is keen to incarcerate her because of what she knows about child abuse and the involvement of senior politicians and members of the establishment. We'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.